oddly enough, it is on the eve of May, after the sky has gone dark, that the triumph of the sun, of day over night, begins. Ancients thought of May 1st as the beginning of summer, a time of warmth and abundance, where new blossoms were blooming and older ones were finally bearing fruit, signaling the end of winter's scarcity. It was the light at the end of a very long dark tunnel, and it was ignited by bonfires that stretched from east to west across Europe, hours before the summer sun was set to rise. On the British Isles, this night was known as Calan Mai, or Calan Mai. This was a night of feasts. As the flames lit up the dark, revelers would dance and play. There would be performances and songs ringing in the hopeful sanctuary of the warmer months, with sights set on inspiring higher powers to allow for an abundant summer, with the security of overflowing harvests and fertility both on and off the fields. A celebration and a prayer all at once. But there was another side to Calan Mai, with the 1st of May being viewed as something of a solstice at the cusp of the long days of summer, marking one of the two hard climatic shifts of the year. Calan Mai had something otherworldly about it. This was a night when the veil between this world and the next became easier to see through, and maybe even to pass through. The fires and chanting were for more than celebrating the sun and season. They were trying to scare away the dark things that cross between the boundaries. Witches, fairies, and evil spirits were said to roam the countryside on this night, and it was best not to cross paths with any of them. The flames and folk songs were believed to help with that. But Calan Mai can tell us more than just how the pagans on the British Isles celebrated the dawning of summer. It's our first clue of the etymology for our modern month of May. Calan Mai may sound vaguely familiar if you've ever looked into Roman calendars. You see, Roman calendars were traditionally read quite differently from modern ones. Instead of simply counting from the first day to the last, each month was broken up into 3 separate parts, and the date was calculated by counting backwards from these specified points. These points were known as the nones, the ides, and the calends. The nones fell fairly early on, anywhere from the 5th to the 7th, depending on the number of days within the month. The ides would be from the 13th to the 15th, but the calends would always fall on the 1st of the month, meaning that dates prior to the 1st of the new month would be counted backwards from the calends. So if we wanted to specify a date, let's say Christmas, for example, the 25th of December, we would say the 8th calends of January, meaning the 8th day before the calends of January. Now, by seeing, or more importantly by hearing, that the calends of May, or Calende Maius in Latin, indicates the 1st of the month, it is easy to imagine how the phrase would have evolved into Calan Mai. But now that we know the etymology of the word Calan, let's take a closer look into the origins of May. Although May was adopted into English many centuries ago, which we will touch on in just a moment, it's worth noting that we also know the Old Saxon word for the 5th month of the year. Prior to the use of Latin, the Saxons referred to the month that signaled the onset of summer as Thrimilche, which is generally translated as 3 milkings, as it was said that cows could be milked 3 times per day during this month. And the reason why I bring up this more archaic term is that there is an interesting through line here, this underlying idea of abundance that, though separated culturally, was not lost with its new Latin name. Quite the contrary. You see, May is our current iteration of Mai, which was a shortening of an older Latin word that had been imported into English, likely due to an invasion from the continent. Our earliest English example of May being used in the context of a month occurred in 1110, and was written as Maius Monte. This form in English is a descendant of the Latin Maius Mensis, meaning Maia's month or month of Maia. Now, to explain who Maia is and why this bountiful month may have been named in honor of her, we're going to have to go back through Rome's arrival in Britain, past its conquering of Greece and Gaul, back even to before it expanded outside of the Italian peninsula, back before the future glory of Rome could even be fathomed. It was while they were still on the peninsula that the Romans encountered a deity, a goddess of abundance and growth, of greatness. She represented for them fertility, bounty, and all that bloomed. It was right there in her name, Maia. Maia is believed to come from the Proto-Indo-European Megia, meaning she who is great, from the PIE root meg, indicating greatness, making Maia cognates with other grandiose words, such as majesty, magnificent, magnum, omega, and more. It might be worth noting that the poet Ovid, born in 43 BCE, used the same root word to posit a different theory about the origins of the name Maius, suggesting it comes from the Latin maiores, meaning elders. His idea was that the month of May was named in honor of the elders of Rome, with the following month of June, Ioniores, honoring Rome's younger generation, one month showing reverence for those serving Rome through council, and the other for those serving through arms. There is something compelling about this assertion, and the etymology of June is in fact derived from the Proto-Italic Juen, meaning young. However, this also happens to be the origin for the name of the goddess of marriage, the wife of Jupiter, Juno. Given the Roman habit of naming months of the year after gods or important figures, January for Janus, February for Februs, March for Mars, it doesn't seem so odd for May and June to also be named for divinities. And for all of Ovid's opining, the Roman goddess Maia happened to live up to all of the promises made by the new season. Her name saw her associated with things like power, though not fearsome like the war goddess Bellona. Maia's power was in the embodiment of the concept of growth. She signified not only bounty but fecundity. She was an entity of eternal abundance. Over time, Maia became associated with the springtime and the fertile warmer months, the season when Earth came to life again, flowers bloomed, and green began to take over the landscape. But despite being the embodiment of blossoms and possibilities, Maia is a relatively mysterious figure, at least to us now. She was associated with spring, but she wasn't necessarily the goddess of spring, or at least not the only one. She represented fertility, but there were other fertility goddesses as well. Furthermore, Maia is one of a handful of goddesses associated with a mysterious female divinity known as the Bonadea, a goddess of fertility existing exclusively for the benefit of women and the earth. But though Maia is one of several deities believed to potentially be the Bonadea, alongside Ceres, Ops, Fauna, and more, there is an interesting connection shared between Maia and our good goddess. Maia and the Bonadea were historically worshipped in very similar ways, each having celebrations dedicated to them on the Calends of May, and traditionally receiving a sacrificial pregnant sow as a form of honoring the deity. The fertility of the pig is suggested to be a tribute in hopes of greater fertility of the land and livestock in the coming months. In contrast of the two, the Bonadea's festivities and rites were only accessible by women. Men were strictly forbidden from entering her temple, taking part in her rituals, and even knowing her identity. In fact, use of her name at all was banned. This ostracism of men likely contributed to her enduring mystery, as, generally speaking, the women of ancient Rome were never taught how to read or write. They could not give their accounts of the good goddess, even if they wished to. So her identity and most other information about her has been lost to time. Although we do have an account of one of the goddess's festivals, if you're curious to learn more, check out our episode covering the origins of the word fauna. However, it wasn't simply that Maia got lost in the lore of the Bona Dea. As Rome conquered its way across Europe, it came into contact with many other cultures and many other gods, and Rome in general had a knack for incorporating local deities into their religion, which is how they ended up with multiple gods dedicated to war, fertility, harvests, and more. Some gods were abandoned or stamped out. Others were assimilated into the Roman pantheon as themselves, and still others became conflated with already existing Roman gods. And interestingly, Maia fell into two of these categories. We have already spoken of her early adoption from a conquered land on the Italian peninsula, but after Rome seized the lands of Greece, Maia saw her own lore folded in with that of a Grecian divinity of the same name. It was a curious coincidence, as though the name existed in both cultures, they each had completely different meanings. In Greek, Maia means midwife. It has been suggested that this is related to the word miter, meaning mother, though this is just conjecture. But motherhood plays an important role in this new Maia's story. You see, in Greek mythology, Maia was a nymph, daughter of Atlas and Pleione, making her a member of the Pleiades along with her 6 sisters. She was the eldest of the 7 girls and thought to be the most beautiful, though she was known to be quite shy. But even as she dwelled alone on the mountain peaks of Kyllene, she was too lovely to go unnoticed by the all-powerful Zeus, who would steal away for trysts with the nymph in her mountainside cave during the dead of night, as to not alert his jealous wife Hera. They were so sly that neither mortal nor god had any idea of the affair until Maia fell pregnant and gave birth to the messenger god, Hermes. After the adoption of the Greek lore, our Roman Maia became altered, losing much of what she had been. In Roman mythology, Maia had been her own goddess, not simply thought of as the mother of another god, although she was affiliated as either a wife or consort to Vulcan, the Roman god of forges and fire, an equally ancient figure also predating the empire. But after the introduction of Hellenism, Vulcan became conflated with his counterpart Hephaestus, and his lore altered, and his wife now became Venus, as her Greek counterpart Aphrodite was married to his Hephaestus. Additionally, Maia's history was folded into that of her namesake nymph, and the goddess became mother to Mercury, the Roman pantheon's answer to Hermes. Once this happened, the mythos of the Roman Maia, who had long been revered and for whom our month of May was likely named, was lost to time. Yet the honoring of her, or what she represents, has never completely ceased. As mentioned, the celebrations for the 1st of May actually began the night before, when bonfires were lit in honor of the coming season, and to encourage the sun to shine brightly, providing warmth and allowing for growth, prosperity, and the hopes of fertility. And given that Vulcan was honored in the same way on his own festival days, it's interesting that her worship and the celebration of the month named for her should include these sacred fires. Perhaps the tradition hints at some remnants of their union, especially when considering that the fires lit for Vulcan were considered more of an appeasement. People set bonfires in hopes of Vulcan sparing them from flames that were more destructive. And as we've already discussed, the fires of May, of Calan Mai, also served as a form of protection, at a time when the veil between the natural and the supernatural worlds was believed to be lifted. But it wasn't just the British Isles who observed these rites. Elsewhere on the continent, fires were lit just the same. The flames, as well as singing and dancing to folk songs, was a similar celebration, intended both to ring in the long fecund days of summer and ward off evil. In Northern Europe and Scandinavia, this festival was known as Walpurgis Night, named for Saint Walburga, a Benedictine abbess, though it is worth noting that this name was actually retrofitted onto a pre-existing holiday, as even after converting to Christianity, the Norse didn't wish to give up an excuse for drunken revelry. Saint Walburga became associated with the holiday mostly due to being in the wrong place at the wrong time. You see, she had initially been buried at Heidenheim, the monastery she oversaw in Germany, but her remains were later moved to the Church of the Holy Cross at Eichstätt, where she was interred on May 1st, 870. As time pressed on, these celebrations were tamed into more of a civilized merriment. By the late Middle Ages, the festivities were focused less on fire and more on reveling in the verdant and blooming plant life of the season. In France, there is a tradition of giving out lilies of the valley, a small, white, bell-shaped flower that usually blooms around late April to early May. In modern times, this day sees vendors popping up on roadsides and in markets so people can show their affection for loved ones by offering a sprig or even a bouquet. This is said to have begun in the mid-16th century, when the flower was presented to Charles IX for good luck. Much appreciated, he chose to offer flowers to the ladies of the court every May 1st thereafterwards. Yet, this tradition of offering flowers or greenery on the 1st of May was already an established tradition by the early 15th century. We can find evidence of this in manuscripts of the time, such as the Duc de Berry's famous Book of Hours, whose rendering of May includes courtiers outside of the Hôtel de Nes, the Duke's own Parisian residence. This illumination showcases the ladies of the court donning bright green gowns. The color is known as vert gai, which was generally an uncommon color to see worn at the time. This was due to vibrant green being a particularly tricky color to both dye and maintain, as the green dyes of the time were unstable. They were neither light-fast nor wash-fast, and they typically faded quickly, becoming muddled and grayish. This actually made it far more common to find green worn by servants and peasants, though even they preferred brown or blue. But on May Day, nobles could be seen in their freshly dyed, verdant green garments. And in fact, it was tradition to mock anyone who was not wearing green on the 1st of May. But if we look closer at this illumination, we can see that the nobles pictured are all adorned with crowns and jewelry of green vines. Even the horses are draped in May's bounty. The tradition of actually bedecking oneself in leaves and plant life was known as wearing May. A crown of clover, a bracelet of leaves and flowers, a hat made of leafy twigs, are all forms of wearing May, though it was preferred for the predominant color to be green. In addition to wearing May, there was also the ritual of planting May. Traditionally, this entailed uprooting a bush and replanting it at the door of someone you wished to court or honor, though it was quite common to simply place a branch at someone's home. Oftentimes, this practice was performed by bachelors hoping to earn the favor of eligible young women. And there was a language to the plants as well. A linden branch was a declaration of love. A rose branch indicated homage to a young woman's beauty. An elder branch was viewed as a denouncement of the girl, suggesting she had a fickle nature. We find a similar practice in Greece, where there is a tradition of making or buying floral wreaths on the 1st of May, which are hung up at the entrance of a home for a couple of months, and then burned in midsummer during the St. John's bonfires. This festival of St. John, much like Walpurgis Night, is named for a saint, though it is almost certainly part of a pre-Christian ritual, this time of cleansing and divination, known as Clidonas. It is during this night, St. John's Eve, that unmarried women perform a ritual to divine the fate or identity of their future spouse. On that same night, large bonfires are built and people take turns jumping over the flames, traditionally as a means of cleansing and purifying themselves. And it just seems so curious that cultures from the far west of the British Isles, all the way across the continent to Greece, should celebrate the beginning of May the same, with bonfires and blooms. You have to wonder if there is some kind of absolutely ancient, maybe even prehistoric philosophy connecting it all. I often reference Proto-Indo-European as a language when explaining the etymologies of words. But what about Proto-Indo-European as a consciousness? PIE as a language basis is largely theoretical. We don't actually have as many answers as we wish we did. So maybe there is something buried deep within European history that ingrained in people the need to build these fires to celebrate the month of abundance. But it would probably have to be something big. Something that was, itself, the embodiment of greatness. Thank you so much for making it to the end if you did. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. It really helps out the channel. And I just want to take some time to thank you for supporting human-made content. Each episode on this channel is researched, written, and produced by a human being without the use of AI, which means that each of these episodes take an incredible amount of time to produce. So your support, even just by listening in, is greatly appreciated. Thank you so very much.